All right, cool. The recording should be underway. Without further ado, Prime Minister, here.
An extreme nationalist populist is unsuited for one of the most diverse federation states in the world. We say that Modi's tenure as Prime Minister has done more harm than good for a majority of the people living in that state and created a state of crony capitalism, of theft, and of nepotism. What do we have to prove in this debate? First, we have to provide a clear counterfactual as to when Modi never got power. We think alternative political leaders could have had opportunities to get into those very same positions of power. Most likely, we think of different alternative cycles of elections. Therefore, you wouldn't have one person or one group of people in power. You would have alternative ones, different ethnic groups with different backgrounds. Second, we have to provide a clear explanation as to why Modi's tenure has a negative effects on the state of India and why those effects are exclusive to the way he acts as a political entity within that very same state. In my speech, I'm going to talk about three things. First of which being the national politics of India. Secondly, Modi's effects on the international relations, that the way India is being perceived as a state in the world, in the wider world. And third, I'm going to talk about capital that being has accumulated the most and has spread out only to the people he cares about and not to the general population. So when you look at Modi and the way he acts, he's one of the biggest examples of national populism in its very core. He has taken a state that is very diverse and reduced it down to one single identity, trying to capitalize on the very fact that people will buy into this narrative that India is just one thing, that it's not diverse, that it's simply his perception of it. He has a couple of ways to do this. The first one being a symbol. He's very pro-India, he's not pro-Muslim, he's not pro-reconciliation. The only thing he spouts is being pro-India, right? We think this is not representative to a lot of people, and we think as a principle thing it's very bad, right? Because what we want as societies in most nation states is that you have political leaders who are representatives to the most amount of people, right? That you get actual people instilled in governments that are representatives and therefore can have empathy, that can actually relate to the people and their problems and their struggles. Secondly, we think due to the nature of his populist tendencies, he's flaming up ethnic conflict for no reason in a lot of cases. Right? He's trying to gain political gains, he's trying to gain some type of support. His idea to name India Bharat, for example, is a populist move that puts India first, but negates all of the population living in that state. Yes?
India was ruled for 40 years by the Congress party. If they want to say Modi was corrupt, the ones before him were way more corrupt.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to deal with this, but then we will go to the capital international. Second, so what is our comparative in this case? Right? If you had different leaders, if you had different political parties, you had different ethnic groups that could go into here and have these cyclical effects on political action, you could have more representation. We think this is a value in itself that doesn't happen under Modi's government. Like, he's not interested in that. He's a populist at his core, and that's what he wants. Secondly, international relations. And we think this is crucial in this today. We think that his government flip-flops between alliances. He goes through BRICS and China, at the same time flipping also between the US and China. Modi's tenure has not created a unified diplomatic vision and policy for India. Why is this extremely harmful? First, you're not going to get support from the West because the West really looks at countries that are unified, that are stable, that have a singular diplomatic policy. The second thing why he won't get support from the West is because his democracy is not seen as legitimate, right? And that's a crucial thing. Second, flip-flopping creates a situation where you're not seen as a reliable partner. One of the most crucial things is that you have to be perceived as someone that can be done 10 years, for 20 years, for 30 years, that you do infrastructure projects there and know that you're going to get the return on investment. This manifests itself in many different ways. Why is this extremely bad? First, you don't have stability and you don't have long-term investment deals, right? Because Modi himself, and we're going to talk about capital later, but he's primarily allocating capital to his friends and the people he only cares about, the people he's very much associated with. So therefore, you're not going to get the type of investments into a very diverse amount of areas, for example, that's very crucial in India to, for example, get investment in rural areas. Because you're simply not going to be seen as reliable and trustworthy in this. Secondly, we think it creates a precarious situation in terms of national security. We don't have enough alliances, we don't have enough people to rely on, and you're not seen as trustworthy. That has two effects. First, which India is isolated in themselves, therefore isolated states act in weird ways. They act in impulsive and emotional ways. Secondly, you're more prone to attack side, because when you're not, for example, when you look at India and Pakistan, you're not seen as a state with a lot of allies. In that instance, you're seen as someone that can be attacked. We think this creates a precarious situation for them. What happens on our counterfactual? We think in cases where, for example, different political leaders could have popped up and, for example, taken elections, right? In these instances, you can't really flip-flop between your policies, right? You have to take, you're going to rely on the things that happened before you. The difference between Modi and what is exclusive to him is that he has such a grip on power that he doesn't fear losing it. He knows that he has it and he knows that he doesn't have to give it up. That essentially allows him to do whatever he wants, right? That allows him to be impulsive. That is essentially how most authoritarian states act like. This Putin, this how Trump even acted. They think when they have power and they're not going to lose it, they can do whatever they want. We think in this case there's been a clear abuse, and that is extremely negative. Third, what is special about Poland? It's his capital, and that manifests in two ways. He's extremely rich, he's extremely resourceful, and this is crucial to know. Secondly, he has a lot of social capital. That means he has a lot of connections within the country with businessmen. Actually, sure.
So why do people vote for a nationalist anti-Muslim politician/party?
Sorry?
Why did people vote for a nationalist and
Christian will answer that. Okay, so in this sense, you have money, he has money in resources to a very large extent. Secondly, he has social capital in the sense of connections. What that means is he can pop up a system of crony capitalism where he only appoints people into positions of power that he knows and he trusts. Why is this extremely harmful? Because you have massive wealth disparities within that very same state type. And India's one of the biggest problems that very state is facing is that the capital is allocated either to urban areas and certain classes within that society, or secondly, you're not going to get allocation of resources into rural areas. Why is this extremely harmful? This is obviously looking at the population growth of that state, looking at how big it is, you're going to have just a quantifiable measure of harm to a lot of citizens, right? It's one of the most unequal countries in the world when you look at pure wealth inequality, right? And we think this is something to consider, right? What do we think on the comparative is that when we could have had, for example, different alternative political leaders getting instead of the government or getting into voted in that instead of Modi, you would have had potentially more populist forces, even in the left wing sense, right? You could have more equal distribution of capital that would be massively beneficial for all the people in that state, right? We prefer that even to this alternative, right? If you have massive wealth growth, and that is the case, they made my time and say that's a good thing. We say, in this case, here, it has done more harm than good. It's quantifiably, that very same benefit has only gone to a very small amount of people. We think that is a thing worth considering. For all of those reasons, open government. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the speech. Now from the leader of office, the case. Here.
In a state where party ruled it for 40 years, we believe a new phase, most likely, most times, is a good thing. Two things from the opposition. One, why you have better and more efficient parliament and government that is for the people. And two, why there is less corruption inside it. But before that, framing. Why? What Modi is doing societally, it happened more times anyways in India. Three reasons. One, colonialism, when Britain left India, basically split the country in two, like Pakistan and India. This created massive breach between Hindus and Muslims. This created generational trauma that both of them have felt for years and decades that builds up over generations. This means that most likely society, under any case, will take Hindus or Muslims, depending on which side you're on. Therefore, whatever party needed to go against Congress would most likely also weaponize Muslims in favor. Secondly, there was tiredness of the status quo. This is like basically whatever other thing happens would be against the Congress party, therefore they would oppose it, they would try to do something radical. But three, it wouldn't be leftist. The reasoning is because the US want to have India as a close ally next to China. This is why they started having massive influence, which by the way, this takes down the escalation in the case. Because being nationalist being isolationist is completely different. Modi has an active incentive to cooperate with the US because then he's able to get favorable agreements in Asia, which is the second biggest country in. Okay. Going to the case. You get better efficient government because of rebirth of politics. Why politics in India was so stagnant? One, the Congress party ruled it for 40 years. I don't need to explain it. It was almost like they're going to get elected every other time, but every other time. But secondly, the Congress party in itself was stagnant. The political family that ruled it was Gandhi, which was like son after son after son after son. This means no new phase was coming to be the prime minister of India. But thirdly, that party created big access to elites. This is because these access get built up upon generations. The point, your parents and my parents were friends. Now we're going to both grow up in the same private school. We're going to have better contacts. This means that there was a stagnation in which actors had access to the power of the government. They were the same because they were the same in context for 40 years. Why then, Modi being in power, fixed the stagnation? Three reasons. One, he could not rely on the elites that the Congress party relied upon because, notice this, the cost for the elite to side with Modi when he was about to get elected was way higher because it was uncertain whether he was going to be elected. The previous party was in charge for 40 years, therefore it is way more likely that they were going to side with them. This means for Modi to rise to power, he needed to find new people outside of the current elite structure. Secondly, he had to oppose the previous structure in order to gain more political points in those elections that India has. This means that then it is more likely that he also needs to find new ways of doing this. Why is this generating more government efficiency? Three reasons. It removes nepo jobs, nepotism. This is because one, you need to remove people who would be of the old guard that were stuck in the Congress party for 40 years, and it was certain that they have the same job. Secondly, the people who gained the new jobs were uncertain whether their jobs would stick because it's a new party that just became power. This gives an extra incentive then to actually be productive in government and pass policy because you don't know if you're going to be there the next term election. But thirdly, you also have massive messaging. You are the new narrative, the new thing that comes to India, therefore you want to push that, and therefore you're more likely to push on policy. But wait, even if there is no new policy passing, why is it a good thing? Two reasons. One, tiredness towards the system means lack of accountability towards the system. A new face appearing in it means that then there is more scrutiny towards it. Notwithstanding, the elites would are still marginally with the Congress party. This means that the media that controls Indian politics as well are with the Congress party. Even if Modi controls politically India, the scrutiny he received while being in charge means that there is higher accountability, therefore there is less ability to fuck over. Congress would fuck anything because they control the media, they were the ones who had it.
Point?
Not everything. But secondly, there is an active incentive from Modi to pass policy that is good towards India. This for two reasons. One, in order for Modi to get elected, he needs to go to different regions of India that Congress will not play. This would be like region places like South India or other poorer regions. This is where God wants to focus. In order to get re-elected, he needs to build infrastructure. He don't just rely on rhetoric because, like, after a point, two or more, the same thing that Congress did would apply to him.
Point?
What are the benefits of this? No. One, more laws happen. Notice, some of these laws might be racist. We proved in the training why this most likely happens anyways, but notice, racist laws are way less than the infrastructure you build. Infrastructure is almost always permanent. Why? Because in order to take down, it takes a long time, right? And also infrastructure creates active jobs and more money. This means more food to the average Indian. But secondly, this happens to the most important regions of India, and the regions that India needed the most. The ones that the Congress party would have left behind. Yes.
This is a serious theory. If me and my friend both plan to punch you, but I end up doing it first, does it mean my punch didn't harm you, or that you're not going to the hospital?
No, this is pretending. Both of you punched me, one of them punched me later, but also gave me time. This is the response. Okay. You have less corruption because of removal of Congress party. Why was Congress Party collapse? I think this is like already explained the previous one, but two more things. One, the authority of Congress was unquestioned because it had almost like an oral prestige based on the dynastic rule it had. This means that in order for me to get even like a regional position in power, I need to have close connections with parts of the Gandhi family. This then creates cycles of not efficiency, of not trying to through how's it called, meritocracy, in order for me to gain these positions, but actually in nepotistic relations. Modi cannot rely on this since he did not initiated in the start have this network. This means that the people that are working in the regional government of India need to go there meritocratically. This means that all of the previous things that proven about the system of government applying in the local level strengthening. For all of both reasons, both of them.
I think those are all from the computer. I think very continue the dot it. Here. Okay. I don't believe. I just don't know. I didn't have much. Very right. That's no.
Modi is a national populist. What's more, he's a national populist that has held a desperate grasp on power for far too long by twisting India's democracy into a system of vote for Modi or vote for a loser. In this speech, firstly, attacks on OO and I'll prove why our case still functions within this debate. Firstly, then, they say that colonialism was the reason why there was always ethnic divide, and that would be symmetrical on both sides of the house. Firstly, no, I don't think we get a systemic explanation as to why there couldn't have been a federalist party that opposed this Congress party. We might think that if you manage to create a party that encompasses and engages all the ethnic groups within that society, you're much more likely to come to power because you appeal to everyone. And secondly, if the Congress party that they described was really so bad, we think people were looking for alternatives really actively within that society. So we think there was a lot of latent political capital that could have been used. Secondly, then, they say, no, our argument about like, diplomatic isolation doesn't work because India is cooperating with the US. First, this doesn't work on an example basis. The UN voted on Russia and whether or not to condemn that invasion. India abstained from that, and the US condemned that very heavily, so we just don't think this is true. Secondly, I think India has aligned itself with the BRICS alliance massively, and BRICS presenting itself as the dominant opposing force to Western hegemony clearly means that India isn't very tightly aligned with the US, right? Why is this bad? Because we think that at a point where you don't have a clear diplomatic reach within your country, you're just much more likely to be left without allies in the first place. And we generally think that more cooperation with the US than any other leader apart from what we could have done would have been more beneficial because the US is the dominant economic force in the world right now. All of those investments would have been much more successful. Thirdly, then, they say, well, the Congress party was really so bad, Modi was the only alternative that we could have done. In this case, though, they quite literally proved themselves that there was sufficient political capital to actually come into that system as an opposing candidate, right? They say that there would have been no new face, but Modi was that new face at the time, so clearly it was possible to break into that mold, right? He found those people away from the previous power system that they followed, which I think is really important, though, because that clearly demonstrates that the opportunity to do that was there, right? Yet we say that now, in the status quo, he's been in power long enough to essentially become the villain, right? Maybe even we can see that he was a good leader at the start, but he clearly isn't now, which is, I think, the case from 3 minutes of Fallon's analysis on things of how he proposed this ethnic tension received essentially no response, right? In fact, I think it's very telling that they agree with the fact that a lot of this policy is racist, though, but why I think that their characterization actually doesn't take this out of debate and make it symmetrical is because even if it's true that Modi hasn't directly promoted the amount of racism within Indian society, we say there is a very key difference between a society simply being racist and a society that has racist laws, right? Because this means that if you live in a society that is racist and you get discriminated against as a Muslim within India, then you still have a chance to look out for protection. You still have courts that presumably defend you and have anti-discrimination laws. You presumably can still get a job, right? Because that job also has those same anti-discrimination principles. But at the point where this is so, thank you, which we think is the status quo situation under Modi, you don't have those opportunities, you're locked into this system of racism. So essentially, they could double harm there, right? Even if society already hates you, you now have no opportunity to escape from your position as well. So if anything, Omo just proves that breaking that model was necessarily possible. They need to show why Modi exclusively was the one kind that couldn't possibly done it, which I think is quite hard to show at a point where we tell you that when you engage all ethnicities within the state, it's probably easier to come to power. And secondly, why the fact that Modi has remained in power for so long throughout all of his tenure has been a positive force for Indian society. Let's get to that final point, especially about the good policy for India of how it builds infrastructure, etc., etc. Firstly, I think that through kind of breaking his direct relationship with the US, it's kind of thrown away, for example, a lot of chances for foreign investment, which would have been massively helpful to the Indian people. And secondly, I think this is almost symmetrical for any leader. Almost all leaders presumably want to show something to their people. They want to show that they've actually done good policy. So at a point where we think, well, it's through Spanish to prove that the democratic system under a leader that is not Modi, that doesn't have this draft on society will actually function better, we think we get more democratic feedback, and in fact, probably this pressure to make the economic policy is stronger on our side of the house. Finally, we think that the economic policy that Modi has made rural areas within Indian society significantly poorer, right? It has directly fueled instability in those peripheral regions. Why so? Because the way that Modi engages with the economy, i.e. making economic policies that help his friends in high positions, that help his already wealthy friends and compatriots, right, has meant that there's much less money in the rural areas, which has locked individuals there into a state of economic desperation. These are people taking desperate chances to essentially make a living, right? Often stealing from, abusing, exploiting the lower castes within those societies. And we think this looks like things like racketeering schemes on local shops in a second. This has created instability and fear within those rural areas, right? Which has locked away also those individuals from receiving their full economic potential because infrastructure and changes simply haven't gotten there, right? India has grown massively in terms of economic wealth, but the poorest areas still just remain as poor as they were before. Whereas the counterfactual on our side is that we have more attention to our areas because Indians perceive this problem in the status quo because of Modi's work on the political system, they have just can't remove it. Sure.
All of its analysis is an assumption. We've proven why Modi does not have that many elites in power because she needs to overtake this rule. This analysis does not stand.
No. They are saying only works in the first few years that Modi was in power, right? Now he's been in power for a massively extended amount of time. He's essentially now had the chance to create a new political elite. So just because he broke the previous political elite doesn't mean that he hasn't had the chance to generate a new one. Which brings me to the final point in the speech. Why these people actually voted for Modi? And we think we hear this as a PO and a proposal such as well. 3 reasons for it. Firstly, Modi is an old and secure candidate. He's this grand old man of Indian politics right now, and the Indian ethnic majority that makes up India is really comfortable and happy to see him in power because it's a familiar choice. And we think familiarity plays a massive role in politics because if you perceive someone as familiar, you have less fear of them doing something absolutely crazy. You're much more likely to vote for them. Secondly, we think Modi has done a lot of work to make sure that any other political alternative is blocked, right? Modi's concentration of political capital means that, firstly, there's presumably just higher barriers of entry of other parties actually getting into that system. But secondly, which we think is even more important, you as a new party sort of have a fear of entering that system because you know you're going to lose anyway, because Modi has just gotten so much power to the point you feel that you're not able to compete with that in any other place. Thirdly, we think that he just has a lot of populist charisma, right? He does things like renames India as Bharat. He's an effective propagandist, and we don't debate that he's not a good orator, right? I'm sure that he is, but we think that the vast majority of his policy simply favors the individuals that are already in power and enables him to have a massive grasp on India, right? For all those reasons, I urge you to choose opening government.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Now, also, the leader of the opposition to close the conference.